those of you who mistake this calmness for gentleness make a great mistake, that he is somebody who gets very strangely angry about architectural issues and yet comes across always as a very understanding and receptive person. And I think the clue to this very particular character, partly an inspiration because he always seems to be optimistic, he's one of the most encouraging people I've ever come across. But this toughness, I think, can be seen in the consistency of what he produces. And I don't mean by that it all looks the same, but there is behind this gentle person a very tough architect, and I think that particular quality is very rare in this country at this time. And I'm really pleased to welcome Ron, not only for this lovely exhibition, which really makes the room feel great, and for his lecture.
I'd just like to start by saying, some 6 months ago when Peter asked me if I'd like to have an exhibit here, I said yes, and Peter, as he always does, said, what are you going to call it? Which rather threw me. But at the moment I was thinking about an idea called Insertions. So I said Insertions. And as the exhibition got nearer, I wondered what the hell I was thinking about at the time and regretted ever saying Insertions. So you'll find that the things I want to talk about will end up as insertions by the way. And I mentioned this to Robin Middleton last week, and he said, what a lovely title to talk about anything. Which cheered me up knowing and made me less nervous this evening. I guess if you look at the stuff on the wall, and like most people, you see, most of the work any of us are doing, these days particularly, is to do with putting into the existing environment artifacts, buildings, or whatever. I don't mean that at all. What I'm trying to say, particularly with the end-piece exhibition, which is reinforced by the earlier stuff, what I'm on about is, in fact, this whole business of trying to, the whole discussion that goes on in architectural circles at the moment, of trying to find an architecture that matches public taste, where the public is saying, well, we're fed up with you guys giving us these dreams of yours, and we don't like them. We want an architecture that relates to us. So people are looking for this conversation with architects. Now, I think that's very good and very noble, and quite the correct way to go about building the environment. I would like to point out, though, in passing, that in 1933, in Germany, there was a very similar situation and a very similar conversation about an architecture of the place, of the people, of the race even. But that aside, in a sense, I take that as said, that this conversation needs to go on. But what interests me is inserting into that environment other objects, other artifacts, other pieces of building that might spark off in a very gentle way another idea about architecture. Because in the end, the architecture that is accepted by the man in the street is the architecture that is fed to him through advertising, through things like the Ideal Home exhibition, through what the rich have, and so on. And I would like to find a way of inserting into the environment objects and artifacts that might lead to another sort of architecture. And I guess that's what I'm on about. Whether I call it sets or whatever other titles for these projects really are about that. Of saying, how about this and how about that? Why not think about this? Why just accept what you have? And at the same time going along with this notion that this sort of forcing on the population at large an architecture is probably wrong. So if I could start with the slides and the lights. Now, because of my difficulty in the title, I thought, like in the exhibition, there'd be a little bit of history. I need to run through earlier things. And these two slides are very early background slides that architects used to use. And I put them up, like I put my walking city and the other objects up over here, as images that were exciting at the time, and images that I still enjoy. I own up to liking things mechanically, and I get a great kick out of this thing, which was found, by the way, after Walking City, and is a sort of war machine. I think it's for walking through jungles or something. But if you can leave that as aside, there's this liking in a very non-technical way. I mean, I don't understand how that works. But there's an idea, like this thing, many years ago, Warren Chalk and I stood on the South Bank and watched a guy in one of these things sort of fly off the ground a few feet. And I mean, we couldn't work the rest of the day. It knocked us out completely. And just the idea of that sort of technology still doesn't worry me. And I get a great kick out of it. Next.
Oh, wrong.
I'm sorry.
Would you like to look at it?
What am I doing? Rebecca? That's the trays now. Just liking for things mechanical often. What's going to come up on here is another Airstream trailer. Again, another image of that era. Although this I took in California last year. I mean, these things go on forever. It's a smashing slide on here. About 50 of them on tour. Is it the tray?
Yeah, the tray's good. The return arm is gone.
What do we do about that?
Please, signaling back.
So you'll bear with us a bit. If I can't keep them all here together.
Here, we'll put them in by hand.
Okay. I can give you a quote on the way to explain to you. Oh, we got it. Smash it. Thank you. I mean, you know, I forget, this is an image of the 50s, even. That's an image of the 70s. You know, this shiny metal object, beautifully fitted out. The guy going off on his own, and all that romance of the nomad. Another pair of images, like the other two, that I still find quite exciting. I mean, I still bother to go and take a photo. Just that shine on that piece of metal, and I'm there with the camera. Next. Especially that was in the desert area as well. There were all sorts of amusing things. Yeah? And this one. Should I do that one? Huh?
Yeah.
Shit. Pressing the wrong one there. Okay, sorry, Pete. Hey, there's something wrong with them. There's one in between that, before that. Okay, leave it, that one's all right.
Can you make a little bit
There's one in between.
a focus?
No, you're way up the track now. What are you doing? Okay, well let me talk about another image of the 60s. This is a kid's car called the Amazomatic. And my two boys at this period were very young, I don't know, 10, 13. And I bought this car for myself, really, like others do. But the amazing thing about the car was that it was programmable. You know, there was a car that you cut out a program and you could feed it into the car and the car would perform. Now the nice thing about it, the reason I kept the slides and the point of having them here again is that they relate to an earlier period, but they also relate to young people. I mean, I got a great whiz out of the fact that these could be cut out. My kids were sitting there cutting them out in a very cool way. I mean, they just accepted that there was a very simple piece of technology. They didn't get hung up about it. They just used it. Okay. I'll get this right. Now should have suburbs. The early one. That was then two early projects to do with. The joke with using the word insertions, I always use these for two other reasons. This project of, I don't know, 67, and this of, I don't know, 72, 73, were to do with tuning, the idea of tuning the environment, which when I stop to think about it is the same thing as inserting objects into the environment. So this was to do with inserting in Oxford Street objects that reinforce the nature of Oxford Street, the nature of it as a tourist place, as a shopping place, as a bad weather place, and so on. And was actually came about when the GLC put their extra bit of pavement and those tatty trees in the tubs. And it occurred to me that you could take that further, and there was a whole project to do with that. This much earlier was to do with taking the existing suburbs, and this isn't the real suburb, it's bits of Fulham and bits of Waits homes, and showing how one could take those artifacts, like the Waits home of the year, which is so incredibly outdated and underserviced, and add to them artifacts that tuned them up, made them something else, inserted into that environment strange objects, like there's a school in this area that was Victorian and so on, that had inserted into it images that represent a way of looking at school in a different way. I mean, there was a whole other story to that. This was at the time of the Milan Triennale in '68. And the whole idea was that they would be then popular packages that would be inserted into that environment. So that, I guess, gives a sort of lead up to it. Next, please.
If you can press the thing of the other one on the left.
Suburbs. Now, on the wall here, there are two drawings. Going back to this whole notion of what people think about looking for an environment of their own, I decided that the conservation idea was not a bad idea, and that I would look at my local suburb. I live in a suburb. This is Woodford in East London. But what always fascinated me about it was the fact that there is a sort of uniformity about the suburb, but an amazing range of people, and different types of people, different jobs, different outlooks on life, different lifestyles that live in this sort of sameness. So it's a projection of a public face. It's a projection of what they want to be felt to be. In other words, it gives you a clue to the person, maybe. And they certainly want you to think. I mean, this area is full of, in the morning, bank clerks, insurance people, immaculately suited, umbrellas, marching onto the tube station, or being taken, I should say, in their rover by their wife to the tube station. So it's got that same image of middle-class America, of the suburb, and the properness of the suburb. Next. I mean, this, for instance, gives a typical situation. This is where, given that the environment is sort of Tudor, that this guy wants to reinforce that somewhat. He wants to be thought the same, but to be thought somewhat of an individual. So he adds on to his environment these optional pieces that try and get away from that sort of uniform idea, but not too much. Just around the corner you get a sort of crazy guy like this, who's obviously bought a job lot with stone. And I've said this before, I'm not even sure that it's stone, it could be plastic. And it does go into the garage. The garage is lying down. But he's triggered off the whole thing. We haven't taken sight yet, but the whole of this street now has got bits of stone. So people that live in that street want to match that. They want to fit into that same lifestyle. They want to appear to be the same. And I think there's something we can all learn from this. Again, this injection. I mean, I may not like the injection, but this guy has injected into a stereotype situation something rather peculiar by any standard, which is leading to that growth of that idea. I would point out this one as well. You may notice the RIBA signboard on the left. Now this guy is also building in that same environment. This is your fully paid up member of the RIBA responding in the vernacular. Tile roof, brick, timber. No problem with the planning people because he's using all the materials. But I mean, I would contend, this guy's got much more idea of what the suburb's about. And I mean, I find absolutely appalling. So I responded to that. I said, okay, I'm going to inject into this suburb, insert into this suburb, a piece of architecture that responds very directly to the local conditions. I'm going to build, in this instance, 3 semi-detached houses that are on the model of those houses that surround. And this is the territory of the planner. This is where the planner and the local community, action groups and so on, can get involved, because this concerns everyone. This is your street. But, as you may notice, that the houses are in fact just a hoarding, so that when you enter through the door, you're in your own world, and the planner has nothing to say. Next. So, I did this project with my eldest son, and we took 3 typical people in this typical suburb. On the left, an architect. He's built a courthouse behind this facade. You'll see it's got all the overtones of of tasteful, current, Domus type architecture. The man in the middle is a camping man, so he's camping, and the guy on the right was a bomber pilot in the Second World War, and he's bought an old Liberator, and he and his family live in that. And we set up then the condition. This is the private set. The planner is in control, and the local community. And this is the private world. And the private world is also, you'll see as we go on, is defined in this way, so that there is a wall of photographic set, film set, that surrounds your dwelling. So you can put yourself into your own environment. There's an infinite choice of where you want to be whenever you put down whatever it is you want to be in. Yeah. So this is the camping guy. He's got a trailer home and some tents. And again, as an architect, I couldn't resist putting in the platform, which is actually on a track. This is my mechanistic thing coming in. So he's got a first floor garden that's on track and be wheeled up and down the side, so that he doesn't get too bored with the sort of camping situation. He can move around in this plot. So there are those sorts of overtones that this is his side. This is the place he decided this year to be in. Typical section. You can see the set boundary and then just playing with objects in that space. Again, with the camping guy, I thought that he was actually a real market camper. I mean, he's not. There is another drawing that comes later, but he's not cooking by fire. He's geared up. He's probably American. Then on the right, the architectural set. I mean, there are all sorts of. This man is actually bounded by archigram images because I chose them. And you can recognize, there's a robot. Every architect's house has a robot. And the encapsulated bathroom, and the courts, and the spiral staircases, and last year's green, or whatever year it was, 74. The habitat green of the period. Because, the guy may decide to live that way. I'm not trying to impose. I mean, that could be the internal environment. More like that. And the bomber pilot. This is my son's, one of his contributions to the project. And we had all sorts of mad ideas with laser guns, so he could shoot down and live out all his water experience. The only thing that occurred to us afterwards that his family's also got to put up with that. So he has to marry a wife or something. Then there's a sort of slightly in-joke here that I decided then, well, why not make the windows on the facade optional as well? So then there's a double take. You can choose the window picture to suit what you want people to think you live like behind that. And you could mock this up with lighting and shades. And I took a series of images from Domus, and from a friend of mine. This is a Theo Crosby interior. So you could choose from a catalogue to give. I mean, they're keeping up with the Joneses, will be cheap. This is my son's later drawing of the set. He decided that the facade ought to be modern. So there's a sort of all-glass facade, and actually the guy behind is camping in a pub tent and cooking by fire, which is obviously the other option you have. The planner can decide that environment, and you can then insert into that environment your own lifestyle. from there, I got really hung up on the sets thing and the insertions thing. And I was talking to Charlie Jenks one day, and I said to him, you know, I'm going to do this Japan architect competition, House for a Superstar. And I'm going to do it with sets, whatever it is, I don't care. But I can't think of, you know, a superstar. And Jenks suggested the Queen, which was brilliant. I mean, I gave him a set of drawings afterwards because I got so pleased with the idea, and it was absolutely brilliant. Because she is there's a double take again. Once you get into sets, you're into acting and so on. And I reckon she's the ultimate in actresses and so on. And the whole family follow that pattern. And the whole maze of settings that they have to live with. You know, the sort of knighting, the guy. The image of the Queen with kids, she loves kids. She drinks tea, but she drinks champagne. Which is very ordinary. Again, her own children, she loves dogs, so she can't go wrong in the British environment. You see, we all laugh at this, but this, because you think it's her caught off guard, because it isn't. It's part of presenting yourself, I mean, it's part of the training of presenting yourself as an image to the public. And the kids have not quite got it yet, these two particularly. They're always rather bored and not very friendly. So their acting skill hasn't been developed. He gets on and not too bad. So I decided that I would do a palace for the Queen. But the palace, in essence, was a movie studio. I don't know if you can read the drawing here. Can I walk away? Yeah. This is a plan of the palace. And I inserted it into the west coast of Scotland. And it's rather like Burbank Studio. It's an overall structuring of the site in which one can play out the settings that match events and moments in time, so that there is a public set that is this area. There's another drawing that's got a mile-long drive flanked by trees, rather like the Ledoux saltworks at Besson, where you drive and the sort of gate gets bigger and bigger. And then you arrive at a screen that's a facade set. I never took that much further. I mean, it's a portico set after Palladio, but it has no depth. It's painted on. And then as you go into the palace, there are ceremonial sets here for certain people. There's music set and ballroom set and a royal set and a reception set and a terrace set and a picnic set and a horsey set. And then you get a little deeper and there's an official set, where diplomatic set, investiture set, banqueting set, conference set. And deeper still, a family set. I mean, this is where the family move into. So the world gets a bit more relaxed and more family-like, with diamond sets and lounge sets and swimming sets and sleeping sets. And then as you get into this world, there are absolutely private sets, individual sets. I mean, there's silly things like Prince Andrew's got a train set. The Duke has got a quarterdeck set, and the Queen's got a Barbarella set, because I reckon behind all that, there's maybe a wild lady. And these are just then sections showing how she could call up environment into this palace. There'd be an in-house set constructions that she could call up, and the text at the top, and she says that she's a bit fed up with the Royal Rococo. Can't we try something like the 50s? So, the point is that daily, weekly, hourly, she can play with the settings that match her mood. And I mean, this is the direct analogy, and this is Universal Studios in Hollywood. I mean, the only thing is she wouldn't be bothered by all this gear. I mean, not necessarily, anyway. Just the original drawing, which was reversed. Details. I did a number of drawings of interiors of the sets, and I mean, well, it's endless. I mean, we could go on forever. I gave up on it because it seemed to say all I wanted to say. An investiture set. I mean, in fact, you see Westminster City Hall. Westminster Hall, or the Abbey, is exactly like that. It's a setting that's geared to these sorts of events, and the television, the lighting people are all hidden out there in the top, and we'll watch it on the television. But you could do it in this homes in Scotland without all that travelling around. And there's another set, you know, the bleacher seating. I don't know, that may have been the coronation, I guess, which is an amazing event, an amazing bit of theatre. And the settings for that exist anyway. This is the dining set. The drawing's up over there somewhere. That I wrote a spec for this because I wanted sort of reality into it, and I tried to describe an actual. This is actually the dining room at Buckingham Palace, and I got carried away with writing a spec of how you could blow dust into the furniture so that when you sat down it did slightly puff. And you rub down the velour so it was slightly warm. All that sort of antiqueness that one gets, a rather tatty gold-painted frame and so on. I mean, I guess what I'm saying with these things is that what a bloody shame that these people have had this opportunity of trying another situation, put up with what very often tact. They'll give it a try at least. This is then just a series. You're going to have to move very fast. The key things on those are, I wired the throne for sound. I thought it would be nice to catch conversation in the aside. And then the image that I enjoyed the most was the juxtaposition of Sonny and Cher and the raw through. And I mean, there's another in-joke here. This guy, with his back to us, is actually conducting a mass wedding in the desert just outside Las Vegas with hundreds of couples there. And he's standing here and he's got a pair of gumboots on. It's just a joke that I enjoy. Nobody knows about that. Then the project for Heathrow. This was a rather strange one. I mean, don't worry that that's back to front. It's got nothing to do. I was asked to have a look. There were 3 or 4 groups of people asked to look at the central area of Heathrow, which is like this. I mean, geez, I don't know, anybody as old as me can remember this as a perpetual building site for 20 years, or whatever it is. It always looks like that. And some smart guy at the British Aviation Authority has suddenly decided, hey, it always looks like a building site. And what a way to present ourselves to people arriving. And the idea was that the group of people would just come up with a very quick thought about how to handle that central area. One group did a landscaping scheme, another group put a huge structure over the whole thing. I don't know what the others did. But anyway, I'll show you. And the things that come out, I mean, amazing. I mean, look at this. This is for the driver, information for the driver. And this is without looking off the ground. So, I mean, it is an appalling mess. I mean, they're quite all night. You know, if you compare it to almost any other airport in the world, the objects are quite nice, I find. It's almost like a history of architecture since the post-war. There's every building type, you know, because they crop up in sort of 5-10 year intervals. You get the early Gibber buildings, which are, you know, for the moment were interesting and good and are part of the heritage, if you like. And you get the rather flashier things of more recent years, right down to the recent sort of plastic bits they added in. What I was interested in was trying to insert into this some, leaving the architectural monuments, but trying to insert into it a structure that was overpowering in itself, a carrying mechanism for all the tact, all the road signs, all the advertising, areas like the outside the terminals where you could tent the taxi waiting areas and so on, and links directly with parking, and ring the middle area with this rather strong band of staff, just a carrying mechanism for services and so on. Very simplistic idea, but the idea was that we should react like that, you know, it was, I don't know, 3 weeks' work, and just see what we could come up with. And they went for the landscaping then, obviously. Which is a crazy thing, of course, because the diesel there will kill off every blade of glass within 2 days. So that's my liking for the mechanistic as well. Can I read you that? I was very impressed with when Ken Frampton spoke here, and when Cedric and when Bob Maxwell, with this sort of very academic quotes. I couldn't find any academic quotes. There's a quote here from John Keatis. Which is to do with this idea of inserting and making change by gentle insertion. The automobile changed our dress, manners, social customs, vacation habits, the shape of our cities, consumer purchasing patterns, common tastes, and positions in intercourse. Robert Kennedy said, 1/5 of the people are against everything, all of the time. I don't quite know what to make of that, but I just found this fascinating. There's a smashing one from Arnold Wesker, from Chips with Everything. Every place I look at, I work out the cubic feet, and I say it will make a good warehouse, or it won't. Can't help myself. One of the best warehouses I ever saw was the Vatican in Rome. I won't dwell on this. I mean, it's an architectural project. It's to do with, and it's on the wall here, it's to do with inserting into a city called Trondheim in Norway, a lot of people here know and did the scheme as well, a library and some other facilities into the existing urban fabric. And I just use this as I think quite wrongly, actually, on reflection. I got carried away with the brief where they were telling us to look at the whole block, and I sort of kept repeating myself. But if you look at this drawing, there are certain buildings, the corner buildings particularly, that were to be kept, and we had to insert into this library and deal with other areas at the back. Now this drawing, I think, is probably the best one because it retained much more on the bottom of the street at the top of the page. But the interesting thing for me, whatever it's about, was that the existing environment isn't all that good. Again, it's rather tatty. The existing buildings, on the whole, were interesting, like the buildings here, because they were reasonably old. They weren't particularly good. And the town hall, the old town hall at the end there, I mean, in most other places, you'd never give it a second look. And the big building at the back, the one we really had to retain, was the local fire station built in the 50s, which is the one building that should have been bought. And I chickened out. I should have suggested that. But I was very keen to insert into this rather boring, ordinary environment a statement about what the library could be. Now, whether it's successful or not, if you ignore the middle elevation, which is the outer street, I was very interested in how one could produce this large-scale object and try and relate it to the smaller scale, not very interesting environment that surrounds it. That's the model on the left. Just some detail about how the spaces might be used. An idea of arcading through the centre of the site where there was historically a free passage, public way. The jury, by the way, as I understand it, disliked all the schemes, and there were a lot that had an arcaded system, because they said it had nothing to do with the tradition of building in Norway, which I might add seems to rain every other day of the year, snows every other day, and is dark and grey and all that. So I mean, that was how I saw it. I would have liked to have done that, and I played around with colour. I was very fascinated by the idea of using coloured glass where the window is, in other words, sun glass, and using paler tints on the solid so that the see-through bits were stronger. So there's a sort of dichotomy, and I would play that same colour game in the existing buildings as well, to play out an idea about colour. Excellent. You see that I should never have put that backlog in. I realise that now. I don't really know what to say about this. I never put it in the exhibition. It was an idea of taking this idea of sets a little further, and I probably will carry on with that, of talking now about, I've played out a sort of suburban sets idea. And this was one of the first images for an urban set, just trying to take the sort of essence of urbanism and make those settings. I mean, another set, the sort of landscape that's not real, where the trees are red and the houses are only edges, and there's actually a whole other world going on under this green paving. The idea of unreality and of putting into landscape unreal objects. One of my objects here is a play on Peter's lumps projects, where he plays with lumps and molds them like terrain and trees and so on. And I've got a red lump. This notion that if you put this strange hill or strange landscape there, somehow you should realise that it's got an edge. I like the sort of joke of that. A fascination with scaffolding. I don't quite know what to say about it. I've been collecting pictures like these for years. There's a sort of architecture that comes out. This building in Portsmouth that Ruslan took the sample. I mean, at this moment when it was covered in polythene, it was absolutely stupendous, just hung, draped thing. But in fact, they come along and put the curtain wall behind it. It's another one of those buildings. And Cornwall Terrace in the park, they've just taken it all down, unfortunately. And it's there standing in its pristine elegance. But in fact, it was much more interesting that it had that sort of feel of being squatted in, and a temporary shelter, and no more of a joke than the office buildings that now inhabit what was once very fine houses. This is another image of Cornwall Terrace. And then from my own insertions here, just beginning to explore that idea of scaffolding and draping over scaffolding, and dust covers. It's an idea that Peter and I have played with before on another scheme we did in Trondheim, where Peter was playing with a layering of space around the edge of the building that could be adapted and played with. And I'm sure there's some sort of idea there that they are another sort of architecture. This was Hazel took for me in Rome. Again, incredibly elegant Italian version of scaffolding, with such precision, and they even measure of a very precise module for vertical. This couldn't scaffolding better. And one of them, I keep reading these trees as being pasted on or drawn onto this sheet. And then another insertion. This is on just north of San Francisco, the river. I was teaching at Berkeley one year, and a group of students, and my family and I hired a boat, a sort of caravan with an outboard motor, and we went into the river. What's the river called? Perhaps it's the Sausalito Basin. No, it's not. Anyway, it's up. But this is one of the servicing elements in that environment. If you can imagine the Norfolk Broads, say, there's a cocktail bar here, so these boats pull in, and there's just swamp and stuff behind, and the river and hundreds of boats sailing around, and you just pull in and you have cocktails or coffee or whatever it is, or there's a gas station that looks like that, where there's an insertion into that natural environment in that very relaxed way that the Americans have. If that was done here, the Parks Department hand on it would really have bugged it completely, I'm sure. Another insertion, typical, don't you get a kick out of those ski lifts on that wine snow, just placed into the landscape? A very practical insertion. But you see, the guy, these guys from their suburban homes, don't get hung up about that, no way. One of the drawings over here where I've taken landscape and taken things that Peter's been playing with, of inserting into the landscape, and then there's a whole idea about cutting a piece and pulling it apart and adding into that art notion. I'll read you another. For insertion, poem, right, by Christian Morgenstern, whoever it is, I don't even know who it is. There was a fence with space you could look through if you wanted to. An architect who saw this thing stood there one summer evening, took out the spaces with great care, and built a castle in the air. Is that not? I think that's fantastic. Okay. There's not a lot I can say now. This is where I run out of words, because these were all drawn within the last 3 or 4 weeks, and they're really very notional comments about, the proper Kensington environment. Bang, you put something into it. That's not very gentle, or the park with the, whatever this, Scotland Yard and so on behind, and this sort of growth in the trees. The sort of very simple architectural images, I always find that easy. There's not much point in me getting hung up with, the grid and so on. I just want to make a simple statement about placing things in landscape. The red mound I talked about, juxtaposed with what is the sort of falling down roofing specialist that's gone away. And the idea of the muse that isn't really a muse is just a wall and an arch. So you can leave some. Rome I always find fascinating, that, which is really probably the most beautiful movie set in the world. If you walk behind anything, it's always propped up. And there's been propped up for centuries because they understand that you don't have to convert it and you don't have to play a conservation game. Ruins are great. And so they prop their ruins and keep them as ruins. And they inject a bit of concrete occasionally to make sure it doesn't fall down. And I would propose that maybe that's one way of dealing with things like the Nash Terrace. Egyptian ruin, I mean, you go on with that then, inserting into even very hot historical environments, other hot historical monuments. I'm smashing it. I've got 3 of these. They're selling bathrooms, and it's a bathroom set that's injected, an urban set, right? Injected into Manhattan. Well, there you go. I mean, I can't beat the advertising image, actually. You know, can you imagine a bathroom like that? And this was just fortuitous. I found this guy washing his master in the desert, and I juxtaposed it with an appallingly, in bad taste, sort of French bathroom. I mean, I would find that incredibly difficult to do so, although I enjoy it. I think there are other people that can put that sort of stuff together much easier than I. And smashing it. Who needs a house? Thank you. I think that's all. Well, I don't know what to say about that. I just enjoyed doing that. I found these things and they went together on the page. I should add, I had many more, I mean mouths. I got carried away, I had ears and nostrils and things on the sheet, but it looked very nasty. So I took those pieces off and left them there. Thank you very much. Do I answer? You said yes. You're sitting there with your notebook, Tom. Are you going to ask me something? No?
How do you find all this intentionality?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting. One of the things I always felt, I think the guy that wrote the thing in BD, I did architecture at evening school when I was working at GLC, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, and got into the habit of doing things in the evening, making architecture in the evening, and making very personal statements in that architecture. And then when Archigram first started up, the same situation occurred, that we were working and were making things in the evening together or individually. And I found that habits, and it's become a habit. I go on always making, I don't mean every day, I mean I've got to go down and all that. But I like to keep something going that where my mind can run freely. And in some cases where there is a sort of reality, like there's a program here, which I would hope and I feel has an effect on what I do in my professional life, as well as my working life. A lot of ideas you can test on paper and you keep testing, and you find they gradually start to feed in. Notions and small things start to feed into the real world of your architecture. Yeah, I think you've only got to look at recent architecture, Pompidou, things like that, where ideas that were crazy in the 60s, that a lot of people were playing with, suddenly become a reality. And I think it doesn't cost anybody anything. It costs me a bit of time. You don't fall flat on your ass for doing some stupid thing. You might dream of it. I don't know.
It's great because it sparks up lots of ideas.
That has become it. That's wrong. I don't do it because of that. I do it because I like to do it. And because it's become a natural thing to do. And I would hope that it feeds me as well.
Ron, you mentioned Germany in 1933.
Yes.
Could you elaborate this?
Well, I didn't bring the quote. It was such a long quote. I didn't write it out in it. When the Nazis came into power in Germany, there was this reaction to modern architecture, the architecture of the white box. And there were very long statements by the equivalent of the German RVA, the Verbund, and professorial types about the need for an architecture that matched the time. And there were long political statements by the Nazi Party at the time, National Socialist Party, supporting that. And all I was trying to point out is here we are. For all sorts of other reasons, probably.
Yes, but how do you link that with your work?
I was just saying that there is now a strong reaction against modern architecture, and that there is a calling. And if you were over in the AA a while ago, Colin Jameson, I understand, was lecturing, and he will be talking about the uselessness of architects and how there is a sort of, God knows, by magic, there's an as-found architecture, presumably means by weights and teleordre and all that. But by some magic, there's an architecture that comes out of the builder, which is to do with relating to the past, architecture of pitched roofs, of tweeness and nacelles. And all I'm saying is that is necessary at this moment because of the powerful voice that you get back from the man in the street, whoever he is. That's what he wants. He doesn't like what we're doing.
But wouldn't that mean that we go back to fascism or something?
Yes, it could be. That was one of the points I was making. I think there's we're having this conversation every day. They're very strong move. I don't want to get into politics, but I live in a very straight, up and down conservative borough. And I was appalled to find 1,500 people voting for the National Front. I find that scary. And I think there is a move in that direction in architecture, with the new rationalists, for instance. They are at it.
It's like sort of the Kennedy quote, isn't it? It's always the fifth of the population reacting constantly.
Right. And they react in a very reactive way. And I mean, so I'm saying, great, but you carry on. I'll insert my little bits.
This is the beginning.
And if we all go on inserting little bits, I think people will get used to it and enjoy it.
Did you show this Oxford Street scheme to GLC people?
No. Which scheme?
Oxford Street.
No.
Well,
they'd say we can't afford it. It's
yes,
crazy, it's silly.
No, but
you can't have conversation with people like that. I didn't think.
They'll just do it in 10 years.
Thank you, Ben.
but what was the purpose to do it unless you propose it?
I did. It was published. It was done for a competition. I did with Diana Jersey. We did a tuning London. We took the whole of London and did a cross section and tuned it up. And that was one of a series of drawings. And it was in Casablanca. But I mean, if you're a taxi driver, I mean, they would have been appalled by that. I mean, they're having enough trouble as it is, trying to get them off the road. No, but I don't mean Oxford Street necessarily. I'm just saying there's another, you could inject something else. Instead of putting all that bloody 3 feet of concrete paving and an edge paving stone and these terrible tubs with tatty trees, maybe you could spend that little bit of money and do something better. Or you could spend a lot of money on something really nice. that people would enjoy. And for Christ's sake, I mean, there's enough money in Oxford Street with all the people. I mean, God knows, I mean, what does Marks and Spencer in Oxford Street every day? I think it's an astronomical sum. Let them drip a lot of it out on the day.
Do you ever find that what you call evening work is in a sense counterproductive? Because it gives you an outlet for frustrations which could destroy you if you didn't get rid of them. But I mean, I always feel unhappy if I've got something on the boil, but I'm not sure it's necessarily a good thing.
I don't know, I've been doing it for, God knows, over 20 years. And I don't know, God knows. It hasn't led to a lot.
We used to have an expression, in fact we still use it occasionally, I mean you and I and variants, which is this will upset them.
Oh yeah.
And it's always known to the other person or people you're working with who them is at any one moment. And I suspect the them shifts from, one never actually says who the them is. I mean,
we know them.
yeah. Who would you say the them are?
Today?
Apropos